Chris, are domain names really important? Like, do I really need to own the raw version of my brand? I mean, aren't domain names a lot like real estate? I mean, can't I just get by on a side street or maybe like the second busiest street? Hey, Chris Zuiker with Media Options. We help companies to acquire the raw version of their brand, brokering some of the best domains on the planet. Check that out over chriszuiker.com. Check out mediaoptions.com. I do a daily podcast over there, and check out dnx.com. Okay, so this video and the next 8 videos, I'm going to get into what I call the 7 dimensions to a domain name. Okay, it's part of my thesis on your domain name equals your brand equity. I talk a lot about that, a lot about my thesis and the equation and how I communicate and market domain names. Now, these 7 dimensions were developed by me because when I first started into the domain space, I heard a lot like, hey, domain names are like real estate. There's a lot of speak in the marketplace from domain investors, but a lot of the forums that were really centered on the domain community, okay, talking about domain values and what they sold domains for and what they bought domains for, but nothing that really made sense to me. Okay, made sense to me in my career. I was selling to Walmart, Target, and Sam's Club for 15 years and managing strategic accounts and business units. The biggest was over $100 million at one point. So I've managed some very big businesses. And when I came in, it was like, it doesn't make logical sense to me, okay? It doesn't really even make emotional sense to me on why I would buy a 6-figure domain name, a 7-figure domain name, a 5-figure domain name, right? I mean, you're telling me domains are like real estate. And so I searched and I really started me on this journey to really understand and develop my own thoughts for why a domain name is important. Now, these 7 dimensions are like a matrix, okay? It's not like, it's just like, okay, well, you hit 1 dimension or 2 dimensions. I mean, it's going to be a matrix impact, and it's going to, really, it's going to vary depending upon the business, depend upon your business, depend upon the industry. There's going to be a lot of different factors that are going to be at play here. But what I can tell you is that at some point, in your branding, if you don't own the raw version of your brand, you will be impacted by one of these 7 dimensions. Now, the higher you go up in these dimensions, well, guess what? The more you need to acquire and own your brand, okay? Your brand and domain name, the raw version of your domain name. Now, what I mean by that is that, let's say it's Get Quilt versus Quilt, okay? Quilt would be the raw version of your brand, of your domain name. Get Quilt would be something that you added on to because you didn't want to acquire that. You want to make the investment. Okay, there's many different variations you can make in this. But these 7 dimensions are, what I found in reaching out is that there's always 1 or 2 dimensions that have the biggest impact. Okay, so a couple of things here. If you're a brand, you're going to want to pay attention to these because this is going to impact your marketing. This is going to, well, I'll get into that. But if you're a domain investor, listen, you're going to want to pay attention to this because this is going to be how you're going to communicate and market and potentially sell your domain for the biggest impact and the biggest dollar, okay? Okay, so that being said, the next 8 videos are going to go over each of these different dimensions. The first dimension is the global positioning. Now, what I mean by global positioning is how your brand and how your brand, how it relates to all the other brands in the marketplace that call themselves the same brand. So, for instance, if you look at a brand like Carrot, there's many different, I think there's over 10 different brands that call themselves Carrot. And they all have a different domain name, right? Because only one can own carrot.com. You look at Hive, I think there's 14 companies that have raised over $1 million that have Hive in their brand, and yet only one can own Hive.com. My favorite example is Kraken and Kraken Rum because I think that there was just a very big lost opportunity out there with Kraken Rum and Kraken. And I'll go over each of these examples in when I go over that specific video. Okay, that is the first dimension. The second dimension is industry positioning, and that is how do you rank compared to the other brands in your industry. Now, recently I was looking for a bed. I still am looking for a bed, okay, to buy a bed. And as I'm looking to a bed, I'm typing in, and I'm looking at all the different brands that are out there that sell beds today. Okay, there's a lot of great brands, a lot of very good brands. Now, you look at Purple, you look at Casper, you look at Tough and Needle, right? TN.com. You look at Wink Beds. You look at Brooklyn Bedding. There's all these different examples. Now, Industry positioning is how does your brand rank when somebody comes into the industry and they're looking for a solution that you offer? How do they rank? Like if you put all these together, does your domain name, does it give does it communicate more trust than other brands in your industry? I can tell you this, like one of the things that you see is that the more confusion that you add and the more complicated that you make this journey, it impacts conversion. It impacts conversion because longer domain names, they anytime you create confusion to your brand, it impacts how your customers are how they trust you. Okay, so I'm gonna give you one example here. There's an article, an interview done by the founder of Dave.com. James Iles did this over at Names Pros. You can go over there and check it out. Maybe I'll put a link in the description below. But one of the reasons why Dave bought Dave.com is he said, listen, like it's about trust. Like, Try Dave just didn't have the same, or Get Dave, or, My Dave, or whatever version of Dave.com didn't have the same version as far as owning Dave.com. Because it came down to trust. And I mean, the industry that they're in, they needed to create trust. Okay, so industry positioning is the next one. I'm going to go over in detail in industry positioning, different examples as far as ranking and relating, because we don't operate in a vacuum today. And I think that that's one of the most important things you should understand. Even if you're doing direct response marketing, depending upon your product, what happens is that consumers go back to the industry and they say, okay, well, who else is out there? Before I make this decision, is there somebody else out there that I should be looking into? And your brand will get ranked on that. Okay, the next one is branding. Branding is super important. Do you own your brand? It ties very closely together with global positioning, but in a very personal way to the brand. Like, how do you communicate your brand? Are you communicating with negativity or are you communicating with positivity? Okay. Super, super important. The next dimension, the fourth dimension is marketing. How does it impact your marketing? I'm going to go over in this module several different companies. One company that was sending over 25,000 unique visitors to a competitor because they created confusion in their marketing campaign domain name. So marketing is super, super important. Okay, the fifth dimension is SEO. Yes, it does have a very big impact with SEO. There's numerous articles that are out there, but not necessarily in the way that you think, okay? Not just because, hey, Google's gonna it's this exact match domain name, or I hear a lot, very often that, hey, Chris, Google doesn't care about exact match domain names. That's just not the case. You're not thinking deeper and more strategic about SEO. And so, yes, it does impact SEO. Okay, the sixth dimension is email security. Email security is huge. It's huge. I was on a call just yesterday with a company. I was actually looking to buy a domain name from them, and they have a very long domain name. It's 3 words. And they came back and said, hey, Chris, make sure when you send the email, you send it to the singular, not the plural, because we don't own the plural, and it's just natural. People just type that in. Now, this is without him saying anything, okay, without me saying anything to him about the domain name they were using. The domain I was trying to acquire was not that domain name. It was something that their company owned. But once again, I hear the same thing over and over and over again. I'm going to go over some super, very real examples on the risk to your email security. This is a very, very big one that you need to think about. And the last one is the ability to scale, to pivot. Okay, if your domain name boxes you in too much, let's say it's something with lending. I'm going to go over the example with Zen Payroll and how they rebranded the Gusto because they started to do more than payroll, okay? And their original brand boxed them in, okay? The original domain name boxed them in because they were Zen Payroll, okay? Instead of Zen.com. Be pretty cool. I think that domain name is still open. All right, I'm on to 9 minutes. I'm going to try to keep each of these down to 10 minutes. They may go longer, but this is going to be a series in the 7 dimensions to domain name. I'm going to talk a lot about strategy. I'm going to talk about the matrix and how each of these is going to depend upon the risk and depend upon how you fall in each of these. It's kind of like little levers, okay? Like you're moving global positioning up, maybe you're moving industry positioning a little bit, but depend upon the impact to all of these is really going to be the strategic reason why you need to acquire your branded domain name. I'm going to talk a lot about the different strategies as far as brand, sub-brand marketing, and defensive in nature. And when I first started into the domain space, I actually told people, hey, don't worry about the defensive part of it as much, right? You don't need the .io, the .ai, but how I've actually switched that, and now my philosophy is, hey, you need to acquire as many as you can because you want to keep the noise that is out there for your brand to a very minimum. Okay, so brands need to acquire them like as many as they can, but from a domain investor standpoint, you want to take the exact opposite approach, okay, because it makes your domain names more valuable. So I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to do, I guess I'll do more than 7 videos, but I'm going to do another video on domain valuation, and then I'll wrap it up with, category defining domain names, and really the essence of why brands and why companies need to truly look at category defining domain names. And most of the time it comes down to the 7 dimensions, but also comes down to leadership, leverage, and scaling, and how that is going to allow them to position themselves to continue to grow and to continue to continue the momentum that they have. Okay, so what do you have to do? I don't know. Just follow these videos here. I'm going to put the next one on YouTube. Actually, what you can do is subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do that. Going over to chriszuiker.com, download my book, .com Strategies. That'll put you in another funnel that I have, and you can get emails from me there. And subscribe to my podcast. You can do that. Share this up, but look out for the next videos in this series. You just got done listening to another episode of .com Strategies. Check us out online at chriszuiker.com and at mediaoptions.com.